Have you ever lost your voice? I'm not talking about laryngitis here or the after effects of a particularly raucous karaoke night. I'm talking about that shrinking feeling when you lose all sense of who you are, your confidence, your way in the world. Well, I have, my friend. I think it's been a cocktail of a few things over the years. An exhausting, but not exhaustive combo of the shifting sands of identity, early motherhood, the ravaging of the beast that is perimenopause, social anxiety, masking, burnout, and let's not even mention the pandemic. I have become obsessed with this whole idea of finding your voice and what it means creatively, personally, and collectively when we find it. I want to understand how you find it, and if you've lost it, how do you get it back? Join me as I talk to fascinating people who have found their voices and aren't afraid to use them. People who have found their purpose, their passion, and fearless, authentic expression. I'm talking about writers, activists, artists, thinkers, entrepreneurs. We're going to get into their work and their life stories. How did they do it? What were the turning points? What barriers did they overcome? How did they find the courage? And what tips and tricks do they have to navigate this business of becoming? I'm looking to reclaim my voice, yes, and to get my mojo back, but it's more than that. I want to understand this topic and look at it from all angles: historical, cultural, societal, biological, mythical, even mystical. And most of all, through a female lens. Let's not beat about the bush, it's mostly women I'll be speaking to, with the occasional brilliant man thrown in. But these conversations are for anyone who resonates with the quest. Everybody's welcome. Hi, my name is Jessie. I'm a writer by trade, a novelist by aspiration. I do not have the answers, not yet. I'm not a certified coach with patented life theories or a high-flying CEO with productivity hacks. I am no guru, but what I am is endlessly curious about other people and their stories. I've programmed and run a literary and storytelling event series for over a decade now, so I know firsthand the power that stories have to inspire and transform, and that's what we're here for. So, if you want to find your voice or to be inspired, if you're in a liminal state, a similar boat, if you just really like books or want to feast on the sweeping stories of amazing people's life and work, then this podcast might be for you. Please follow, subscribe, and join me on this voyage into voice. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find ours along the way. Hello, and welcome to this episode of How You Find Your Voice. Today I'm joined by the award-winning novelist Sarvat Hasin to talk about her brilliant and quietly devastating new novel, Strange Girls. It's a novel about an intense and formative female friendship between two characters, Ava and Alia. Their meeting at university is described as two magnets colliding, and before long their friendship becomes all-encompassing. Strange Girls explores how one person can change your whole life, as well as the themes of creativity, longing, and the pain of things left unsaid. In this conversation, we talk about the ambiguity at the heart of intense friendships, the strange grief of friendship breakups, and the ways that our lives slowly pull us into different paths as we grow older. We also talk about creative ambition and about the ethics of storytelling itself, because one of the most fascinating questions at the heart of this novel is who owns a story when two people have lived it together? And we talk about the creative process itself, why Sarvat often writes about the questions she doesn't yet know the answer to, and how the details in her novels come from what she calls chasing the feeling of a moment. I hope you enjoy. Hello, Sarvat. Welcome. Thank you so much for talking to me. I'm really excited to talk to you about your fabulous book, Strange Girls, which is coming out in, I believe, 10 days or so. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's out on the 10th in America and on the 12th in the UK.
And how are you feeling about the publication coming up?
It's quite exciting. I think this book feels a little bit different to some of my others because it's more rooted in like the everyday world. I feel like in my other books have been like bits of magical realism and other things, and this is just rooted in our world. And I feel like people's reaction to that has been different. And I've had some really interesting early feedback, which has been quite lucky. I think that's always a privilege when you have your peers and writers and people reading proofs early. But I feel like one of the things that I've been hearing quite a lot is people saying that they have had a relationship like this or a friendship like this. And that's just a pleasure to hear, because you want to have written something that feels like it's speaking to an emotional truth that will echo with people.
Oh, I really wholeheartedly agree with that. I mean, I think all of us have probably experienced an intense, formative friendship like that. It might not be exactly the same, but yeah, there's something really sort of true and powerful. It's like a nostalgic and heartbreaking story in many ways. Could you just quickly give a little synopsis of what Strange Girls is about?
So, Strange Girls is about two young women called Alia and Nova, and they meet at university and become completely consumed in each other. They have one of those life-changing, intense relationships. And because it's so intense, it kind of can't sustain itself. And the book opens with them in their 30s, and one of them, Arva, has shown up at the other's doorstep because they're about to spend the weekend together for their mutual friend's hen party. And as the book progresses, the past and the present weave together to tell us their story.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you have two different kind of narrative voices and two different time frameworks. So we have Ava narrating in the first person, the present, and then we go back to Alia, who kind of narrates the in the third. I was interested in your choice of kind of changing the narrative person. Could you speak a little bit about that? If it was really effective.
So I guess one thing to say is that I've worked on this book for a long time, and it had very different forms when it started. But the thing that sort of stayed constant was these two voices and these two characters. So everything about the book, the setting, their ages, what happens to them, what the form of the story is, what genre it is, all of that has changed in the last 6 years, but they have stayed the same. So for me, finding this form and this sort of like vessel for the story was about trying to clarify their voices as much as I could. And Arva's voice came to me first, and I think it had to be in first person because I really wanted that immediacy, because she's such a, to me, she feels like such a vibrant and like alive and sometimes quite angry, but bold character that I kind of needed to have that immediacy of the first person. Whereas Alia's voice made more sense in third because she was telling the story of their past and the story of them meeting at university. And for some reason, third person had this almost storybook aspect to it that I really liked.
Mm.
So that really fitted it. And then as I went through it, I realized that what I wanted to do with the two voices and why I wanted them to feel quite distinct and have one in first person and one in third was because I wanted them to be completely locked from each other. So I love novels that do this, and I've done this in novels before, where you have two perspectives and you see the same events from both of their perspective and everything is like bleeding into each other. With this, I wanted it to actually be quite distinct and quite far away from each other. So we never really know what Alia feels in the present. The present narrative belongs entirely to Arva, and the past narrative belongs entirely to Alia. We never see what Arva actually thinks about that, except what is told to us through her. So in that way, they're just, yeah, I guess just locked from each other.
I loved that. I thought it was really effective. And also because obviously at the heart of the story is a really intense and powerful friendship, but also a rift. And that sort of, as you say, like keeping them apart in that way. I also was wondering, I have a little pet theory that I formed like literally when I finished the book yesterday. So in this book, we have a kind of a meta fiction type thing because we have a book within a book, which I found absolutely fascinating. And I want to ask you about kind of your choice in deciding to do that. But the book is called Strange Girls itself. And I was wondering if perhaps the kind of the third person from Alia's perspective, I was wondering if that was the book itself. So it's kind of it's Alia's story and that's Strange Girls, and then we've got Arva's interpretation over the top.
Yeah. So the third person perspective that we're reading, I think, is Alia's novel, which she's written about their time together.
Yeah.
And she has written about to sort of explain to herself and I guess to fictionalize that part of her life. And I think it's interesting because the title of Alia's novel was always Strange Girls, but the title of my novel wasn't always Strange Girls.
What were your former titles, if you don't mind sharing?
So the most recent one was Past Perfect. And it was at the point where covers were mocked up with Past Perfect as the title. But I think it didn't feel quite right. It didn't feel like it really described what the book was. And the decision to call it Strange Girls was, again, I think it feeling like it spoke to some emotional truth, maybe, of the sense that when we are 18, we all feel strange and we all feel like we all feel like we're very unique because we just haven't met that many people, but also we all feel alienated from the world and from ourselves to certain degrees. And the decision to call it that was to sort of collapse Alia's novel and this novel and make that meta-narrative a bit more clear.
Yeah, I love that part of it. I suppose a question that I wanted to ask you earlier, but I kind of got sidetracked by the narrative voices, is what drew you to write a story about this quite ambiguous, quite liminal, but very intense, formative female friendship? Is it something that you've experienced? You mentioned people have said that they related to it. I relate to it in many ways as well. What drew you to write about it?
I guess what drew me to write about it is I was thinking about what ambiguity does to a relationship. And so the ambiguity and the liminality of their relationship for me is almost a point. And it's the thing that I was interested in exploring. And it's the thing that drives the plot for me, because with ambiguity, you have both this like incredible uncertainty, but also all of the space for misunderstanding. When two people meet and fall in love and form a romantic relationship that they have acknowledged and that everyone in their life has acknowledged, then the breakup is very painful, but it has a sort of narrative conclusion. And we have terms for it and we have scripts for it. And our friends and family know how to behave around it. They know to support us. They know what films we should watch, what music we should listen to. There's a whole sort of like canon that's available to us. But when we go through a breakup of a friendship or a relationship that has been ambiguous, that support and that structure isn't there. And often when you haven't decided who you are to each other, there is so much space for you to have mismatched expectations. And I was really interested in that. Like, if you're in a romantic relationship and your partner goes and kisses someone else, you know that's wrong because you've agreed that the rules between you are that they can't kiss someone else. But if you're in that sort of ambiguous liminal space, you can feel completely betrayed, but the other person hasn't really done anything wrong. And so I was really interested in what those mismatched expectations can do to a relationship, but also how the fallout to that can be really, really difficult because of that lack of script and because you're sort of carrying this wound around that no one is really tending to. I guess friendships are such a big part of our life, but we don't really treat friendship breakups in the same way. And I've definitely had friendship breakups, and I've definitely felt a lot of similar things that I felt during romantic breakups, like not just the grief of losing the person, but also that sort of like shaking of my sense of self.
Yeah, it really rocks your self-confidence, actually.
Yeah. And how you feel as, I think, almost sometimes more deeply, because people expect romantic relationships on some level to fail. And therefore, if you have a breakup, it can very easily be like, oh, it just wasn't working. But when a friendship breakup happens, you're like, what did I do wrong? What was lacking in me, or what was lacking in my ability to solve this? But there's no space to talk about it, and there's no space to air that. So you're sort of left alone with your feelings.
Absolutely. It feels like more of a kind of rejection of you as a person, I suppose, is what it is. Like, what I related to, the friendship that I'm thinking of, and when I've kind of had these intense friendships before, they weren't necessarily queer coded at all, but it's more that sort of I guess there's quite a lot of like power play in this book as well, and shifting power dynamics. And I feel that Alia puts Ava on a pedestal. That's the bit that I really related to, the kind of losing yourself within a friendship and that sort of enmeshment, entanglement. And then when the friendship ends, that feeling of kind of feeling bereft and navigating who you are. I thought that was really interesting. What did you want to say about the shifting power dynamics between the two of them over the course of the novel?
Yeah, I really like what you said there, because I don't think a lot of people have spoken about that. And you're so right about that power play and that sense of, I think when they meet and they're 18, Alia's looking for a model for how to be a woman. And she doesn't feel like she wants to be the kind of woman that her family's expectations maybe are for her. She doesn't feel like she wants to be the woman that maybe society's expectations are for her. And she's scrambling around for a model. And I think often people are when they're 18, and you can find that in like lots of different places. You can find that in celebrities, you can find that in novelists you like. She happens to find it in someone who is exactly the same age as her, but she feels is already ahead. And it's so interesting how that can happen in relationships where you can be the exact same age and you can have very similar life experiences in some ways, in that neither of you is ahead of the other really, but it's just a perception, isn't it? And it's just a perception of, oh, that person's got it right, and if I become like them, I can achieve that.
Yes.
But also I think the other thing I was interested in doing in the power play that you're talking about is with the two perspectives. So I think in Ava's perspective, she is the one who needs something from Alia, and in Alia's perspective, she's the one who needs something from Ava.
And they need different things,
Yeah,
maybe.
but the way I think about it is that each of those perspectives, the narrator is the lover and the object is the beloved.
Yeah.
So it's a study of what that longing, but also what that jealousy can be. And I think they have quite a lot of jealousy. There's quite a lot of jealousy in the book, and it takes lots of different
Yeah.
forms. And it takes the different forms that it can only take when you are in this very particular relationship of closeness. So they definitely both feel jealous of each other's achievements, or which of them they think is the better writer, or which of them they think is the more accomplished in their career. But they also have jealousy when anyone else gets close to the other person. And that's a very complex
Yeah.
place to be in, because you want to defeat that person a little bit, but you also don't want them to get close to anyone else. So you sort of want to stay in this world where you both stay at the same level, but are also completely wrapped up in each other all the time.
Which is impossible, because in any sort of friendship or relationship, we see the kind of effects of different outside people coming in. Also, there are different pressures. There's like cultural pressure that comes in as well. I thought Alia as a character is really interesting. I really loved the kind of insight into, I guess, kind of code switching and how she's finding herself and finding her voice and her way in the world. Like, how does she marry these two different sides of herself? Could you talk a little bit about that element of the story?
Yeah, Alia's perspective is interesting because it's also kind of a period piece, in that it's set in the early 2010s. And she's speaking to us, I guess, from a different perspective, like from a different cultural perspective, but also a different time. And
Yeah.
I think what it felt like to be Pakistani and Muslim in the early 2020s was different from what it feels like now. I'm not saying better or worse, because the world is what it is. But I wanted to write into that really specific moment as well, and what sort of cultural language she would have grown up with. So she would have grown up with a very particular time period for what it meant to be someone who's Pakistani and Muslim living in the UK, because it's around the time there's a couple of like cultural moments, that sort of political moments, that are peppered in through the book, and one of them is when Osama bin Laden,
Osama.
yeah, and what the perception of that was, and also that sense that I think a lot of Muslims have, that anytime something happens anywhere, if something has been perpetrated by a Muslim, you are sort of held responsible for it. And I think Alia, because she grew up in Pakistan and has come to the UK for the first time, is experiencing that for the first time, which is different than if you've been brought up in the UK. And she's never had to experience that before. And in coming to the UK, she's experiencing being Pakistani and being Muslim for the first time, being othered, having grown up in a country where everyone looks like her and all of that. She's experiencing that for the first time. But also the early 2010s were a really weird time, I think, to be a young woman, because you kind of had come out of a little bit of the sort of really toxic celebrity culture of the 2000s, but it hadn't fully gone away. So there was still very few positive examples of ways to be female and not be absolutely slaughtered and lambasted in the press for it. I think in terms of women expressing their sexuality, it was a really weird time. We're not that far from the sort of like Katy Perry, I Kissed a Girl-ness of it all. Yeah, so I think her perspective, I really wanted to like narrow in on what both her experience would have been, but also what that time period would have offered up to her.
What do you think the difference is between then, kind of how it was to be a woman or to express your sexuality, and now? What do you see as the difference?
That's so difficult to say because I was Alia's age then, and I'm not now. So I feel it's quite difficult for me to imagine how young people are experiencing all of that. I think we hear all of these things filtered in about young people in their relationship to alcohol and drugs and sex and sort of not being as interested in it as previous generations, which is really fascinating. But I also think we're in a bit of a strange point right now where I feel like maybe 10 years ago, we were at the peak of like the body positivity movement. And now that's really switched around and it feels, and I think it's quite hard for that to not impact on young people and how they feel within themselves, but therefore also how they feel about their sexuality and how they feel about the people. I think hopefully we're in a better place in terms of young people being comfortable with their sexuality and being comfortable with their gender, but that doesn't feel like fixed because we're also in a point in history where with the rise of the right and the rise of fascism, where it's very difficult to see any of those wins as permanent and to not feel very protective of all of the progress that's been made because it feels like it could so quickly be snatched away.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned body positivity and sort of sex and drugs and drinking and stuff. I found that these characters, that the world that they created was really, it was introverted and it was quite sweet. They make just like little forays into partying or relationships, but it's all quite innocent in lots of ways. I really liked that about the book because it really made it feel like it was just, it's so much about kind of becoming and finding themselves. Part of the kind of little world that they create, it's a formative relationships in terms of themselves, but it's also really formative in terms of their voices as writers or kind of aspiring writers. You've got loads of different literary allusions and sort of references, and I just wanted to ask you about that. Like, how did you go about forming their world and how did you make those choices and what do they mean for the characters?
Yeah, that was a really difficult thing to do because when you're writing about two young people, and really within their group of friends, there's about four of them, but particularly two young people who want to be writers and that is their ambition, they are going to be incredibly pretentious because young 18-year-olds are. And obviously, I'm not saying that stops necessarily, but I think I really wanted to express somehow how holy those texts can be, those first things that you're reading when you want to be a writer. And not all of my texts like that are in this book, but I remember reading things when I was at university and when I was doing my master's and knew I wanted to write novels and knew I wanted to be a writer, where a book could genuinely like rewire the chemistry of my brain because I was being introduced to new things. And I didn't do an English literature degree. So I came to a lot of things quite late in life. I don't think I read The Age of Innocence, which is one of the more important texts in the book, until my like mid to late 20s. And it was such a joy to find it and such a joy to have this gift of a book that was very well respected and very, like, part of the canon, but also could speak to me so deeply.
What did it say to you? How did it speak to you?
I think the Newland Archer's journey in that book just felt so unique to me. And I don't think I'd seen anyone, I know other people have written about it, but I don't think I'd seen anyone write a book that expressed how much a person can change you. Because this character starts the novel and he's very self-assured and he thinks he knows what he wants. He thinks he knows what he wants from his betrothed. He thinks he knows. He's so confident, and he like sees himself as this person who's going to, and quite patronizing to his fiance, where he's going to teach her all about the world. And then by the end of it, he's completely shattered because he's met this person who's changed not just everything he thinks about himself, but everything he thinks about the world, and what he thinks is important has been turned upside down. And it's a very quiet novel where not much happens in terms of like the material plot. Yes, and the material lives of the characters don't change that much from the beginning to the end, really. There's processes that happen, but we don't leave them in wildly different places to where you would have expected them to be when they start. But they've been changed completely by that relationship. And it is quite difficult to write about that and write about loving books without it feeling very pretentious. But I also think that it felt like a true way to express how these characters would have related to each other. Going back to what we were saying before about the ambiguity of their relationship, they're giving each other these texts also as a way to express what they can't express to each other.
Yes.
And that was quite delightful to try and think of ways that they could be crafting, both in their own stories, they're writing these stories together, and those stories have codes and messages for each other. But the novels that they're giving each other have codes and messages for each other as well.
Yeah, there's lots of kind of, they've got like an epistolatory, if that's the word, sort of relationship as well, like during the holidays when they're kind of sending each other snippets of things that you say, or kind of recommendations or films. And yeah, they're very influential on each other's tastes. And I suppose there's one of the references that I found really interesting. It's not a literary one, but it's Black Swan, the film, because I feel like it's really telling about their relationship. At one point, I think Alia says that she thinks that Ava kind of seems to see them as twins, and I can't remember the quote exactly, but sees her as a dark mirrored version of herself. I just wanted to like ask you about Black Swan and kind of what it meant in the novel, because I think it's like a bit of a catalyst for Alia to write the book that she goes on to perhaps as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I really love that film, and I feel like what it expresses about that relationship between, I can't remember either of their characters' names, but Natalie Portman's character and Mila Kunis's character, is that sense of competition that they feel with each other, or Natalie Portman's jealousy, but then also kind of desire for her, and how those two things can sit next to each other is really intricate. And then also the conclusion of that film and the body horror of it, and how a feeling like that can be so consuming and so violent, I found really fascinating and really wanted to tap into. But also the film's like over a very short period of time. So there's time of the rehearsals for this ballet, but it gives you all of these snippets into what Natalie Portman's character's life is like beyond that, and the relationship with the mother and how she's become who she is. Yeah, I just really, really, really love it. And also, I think there's something about a film. I think putting a film in at that point in the novel felt important because it's a very different medium to novels, and there's a sort of shared experience you can have when you read the same novel and when you share novels with each other, which is really beautiful and can feel very intimate. But then there's the intimacy of sitting next to someone in the dark, and you're whole world is the film on the screen in front of you and them breathing next to you. And the intimacy of that and the intimacy of them having to confront something that was maybe true about themselves in that way that I really wanted to tap into. Because I think you can have those moments in the cinema, can't you, when you're like sat next to someone. I didn't have that with Black Swan, but I've definitely had moments where I've sat next to someone in the cinema and we've been watching something and something in the film or something on the television has expressed like either a conversation we were having before or something that's true between us. And it can just feel like it hits you in a place that other art forms can't.
Absolutely. It's like visceral and immediate. Like you say, it's kind of like a shared experience. It's not happening solely within your head. I think that the idea of them being rivals is really interesting. And I think that moment is when Alia almost decides, kind of like dares to think that she could be a writer, because although she's always wanted to be a writer, I feel like Ava was so dominating. It's kind of like, it was in the past, it was like her thing, because as you say, she was more fully formed. And there's just a kind of like a feeling. Do you think that both of them can be writers within this book, or do you think there had to be like a cleaving? And at one point, Alia says, "Are you just angry that I got there first?" Do you think that both of them can be writers, or do you think it is a kind of like rivalry competition between them, that they're almost like the same person, it's the same story?
I mean, I think they can be, because what is it about that story that Alia has chosen to tell? She could have told a different story, and none of us are confined to one sort of thing. I don't think it's that they couldn't have both done it. I think it's about, to me, maybe what it's about is the distance between talent, ambition, and work. And it's quite difficult because it's very hard to say when you're young and you both want to write novels who is going to be able to do it. And it's dependent on so many different things. And the book doesn't go into this, but one of the things I'm really interested in is who does get a chance to write, and who does have the time, and who does have the ability to do that without interruption. And because it takes so much from you just in terms of time. And I think one of the things that's happened in the intervening years is that Alia's had a life that has allowed her the luxury to carve out that time that I don't think Arva's had. And that makes a massive amount of difference in writing as much as anything else. But I think as novelists, I think we're actually really lucky because you don't really need anything special to do it. So I think we're actually really lucky in terms of other art forms, in that it's easier for people to do it than it is to, if you want to be an actor, you kind of need, or a musician, or a painter, you need more things. Whereas as a writer, you really just need yourself. But the magic thing is time, and time is very expensive.
Yeah. It's one of the things I think that Ava seems to be very jealous of as well, the fact that Alia has had the time to do it. I do feel that kind of Alia comes from a much more stable background in some ways. It was interesting, the points in the novel where Ava goes into her ability to write, and it seems to be so connected with like when her mother is ill. I think she's completely stopped writing for kind of the last 3 years. I thought that was really interesting. What were you looking to explore about kind of your emotional state and the ability to write, and how that kind of affects your creativity?
Yeah, I think for all of the volatility of caring for her mother, with whom she did not have a particularly healthy emotional relationship before she got ill, has completely derailed the sense of peace or stability she needs to write from. And it's interesting, isn't it? People always have this idea that something dramatic or something difficult in your life will be something that will be really good to write about. And it's not that isn't true. And I have read lots of incredible memoirs and novels and things like that have come from very dark and difficult places in people's lives. But I think for most people, you have to not be in it in order to
Yes.
process it.
Yeah,
You kind
exactly.
of need to be on the other side of it. And Ara hasn't gotten to the other side of it. And there is a sense also because of her family dynamics and her relationship with her sibling where her mother's care has fallen to her solely. And that pressure has blocked her because even if nothing was happening, the awareness of this responsibility is sort of looming over her.
Yeah, she's kind of stuck in a liminal place
Yeah.
there as well, isn't she? And it's interesting when she says that she hasn't really moved on because, like, Alia's got, she's got a husband, she's got a book, she's got their group of friends. She's living a more sort of, I guess, well, she's got the trappings of
Mm.
success and wealth and things. And whereas Ava is still in that kind of, she's living a bohemian life, but she doesn't really have the freedom to live it
Mm.
fully. And I kind of wondered if you could talk about what do strange girls mean to you? Because I feel like perhaps one of the things that Ava's sort of most resentful of is the fact that Alia isn't really what she might consider a strange girl anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think the thing that I was interested in writing about is how when you're young, you can have all of these ideals about how you're going to live your life and how those sort of get chipped away as you leave the university bubble and you're like pulled in different places. And, when you're at university, you and your best friend can live your lives in exactly the same way because the shape of your days is exactly the same. And then once you leave, it feels like every decision you make after university either brings you further apart or closer together. So,
Yeah.
if you're two people who have been very close and then you leave university and you both end up in relationships at the same time, there can be a kind of bonding there and you can kind of become like a foursome and stuff like that. Or if you work in similar careers, that can be a kind of bonding point. Or if you have children at the same time, that's a sort of inbuilt world to deepen your friendship. And if those things don't happen, if one of you gets into a relationship and the other person stays single, if one of you focuses really hard on your career and the other person focuses really hard on something else, then that can bring you further apart. If one of you has kids and the other one doesn't, like all of these things can basically affect your friendship because it's harder to see the other person's life because it's so different from your own. And I think when they were younger, they had this idea of strangers being like, we're going to live this alternative lifestyle and we're not going to fall into any of these things that they perceive as traps. So for Ava, it's a betrayal that Alia's made some of those decisions. And this is partly because of the nature of their relationship, which is very complex and has a romantic aspect. But I think we've all seen this happen with friends who don't have queer-coded relationships as well. I think loads of us know people who have like a best friend that they were living with for years and they're like, oh, this is my wife and we're just going to live together forever and we're maybe going to buy a flat together and all of this stuff. And then one person gets into a relationship and it all falls apart and it ends in tears. And everyone's done this. Everyone's seen someone else do this. And you know how unlikely it is that it will work out, but there's an impulse to do it anyway. And I think some of this is also about what we choose to build our lives around and what we choose to celebrate. And there is a very strong societal gravitational pull to celebrate romantic heterosexual relationships over other things. And there's a strong gravitational pull to celebrate marriage in the way you wouldn't a job promotion or to all of those things. There is a very strong societal gravitational pull to those things. And there's not a lot of space, I think, to really feel like you're moving forward if you're not hitting those goals. I think it's getting better because statistically more and more people are choosing to marry later in life or to do things on their own. But that doesn't mean that there's necessarily an equity between those two things.
No, absolutely. It is almost kind of, yeah, like a conscious choice or it's a philosophy to live
Mm,
by. And I guess Alia kind of conforms, shall we
mm.
say, and then Ava doesn't, and she holds firm, but then I guess she's more damaged, perhaps more ruined by it in the end, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you talk about female friendships, there's a brilliant quote that I wrote down because I felt like it really spoke to me. When you're 20, you think your friendships are everything. You can organize your life around them. It just shifts and keeps shifting until the women you thought you'd call if your house was burning down are just the people to get brunch with. So it's so sad, but it's kind of, it is quite true in some ways. I mean, you have to work really hard, don't you? Have you found that with your friendships from when you were younger? Does that quote speak to you?
No, it's really hard. I think I'm really lucky in that I have just really wonderful, strong friendships, but it's not that it's not work to maintain those. And
Yeah.
it has to be prioritized, and it has to be something that you put at the forefront of your agenda. Otherwise, it's so often the first thing that goes, right? Because if you're really busy and you're really stressed, and like when I'm going through a tough period at work where I'm like, oh, I've got a lot of projects I'm working on, or over the next couple of weeks, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be doing like book promotional stuff and I'm going to be doing all of this. It's so natural to think, how will I carve out time for my partner? And how will I make sure that we're still connecting and being ourselves with each other in a stressful time? But it's very difficult to then sort of activate your brain to be like, oh, but how am I also going to be a good friend? And how am I going to show up for my friends in this time?
Yeah.
We're not programmed to do it in the same way. Also, there's something about those friendships where you can grow apart and your lives can become very different, where you don't really have the same concerns or problems or things. And that can be difficult. But I think it's almost a combination of remembering the history that you have together, but also the value in that empathy and in trying to connect to the other person's life and their problems, even if they're very different from your own. And I think one of the things that's been interesting for me in this is like realizing you don't always have to give advice. Because I think that's such a thing. I don't know if it's a thing particularly with female friendship, but I do feel like it's so ingrained in us to be like, friend comes to us a problem, we try and solve it for them. But they could come to you with something. If one of my friends who has young children is talking to me about something, I don't have children, I would not know how they should handle that or what they should do about it. But that doesn't mean I'm not happy to listen. And maybe that's a step in reframing the friendship that we need to take a little bit. We don't have to be experts on each other's lives.
No, but I guess you have to be in dialogue though, because one of the things that is interesting in the book, you say it's about the unspoken and silence. And I think that kind of distancing that you're talking about there happens when, when you're in your 20s, you are in each other's lives and you kind of all live together and you're kind of like going through all the experiences. And then as you have those different kind of life moments that you just spoke about, it is easy to not keep that sort of conversation going almost. If you're not speaking and sharing things with each other, then it's quite hard to maintain it. Do you call your female friends a lot? Are you like a big phone chatter, or like how do you maintain your friendships and keep?
I'm a big texter, to be honest.
Yeah. You're a writer.
Yeah, I love a phone call. I really love a phone call. And actually, I have one friend who likes phone calls and who used to be my housemate and now she lives in Lisbon. So we speak on the phone sometimes. But I'm a big texter. One thing that I do with my friend who lives in Lisbon that I really enjoy is we write each other poems. Every solstice and every equinox, we will write a poem and send it to each other. And we've never published any of these, we've never done anything with them. And they become these sort of like poetic postcards where sometimes we won't have spoken for a little while and it will give me a picture of her heart at that moment. And it's quite fun. It's like quite a fun writing exercise. I've been experimenting with like different forms of poetry through it, but also because it's writing, but it's not something that I'm making to share with the public. It's just something I'm making to share with her. I feel I can be really free and creative, and it will often mean that we'll have a discussion afterwards where we'll give each other notes on the poem and we'll be like, I like this and I like that. But we're also sort of reading the poem for clues about what's going on in the other person's life. Because sometimes it's hard to say, if you haven't spoken to your friend in a little while, oh, I'm feeling a bit down or blue or whatever, because you
Exactly.
haven't really identified it. And sometimes I find that in the act of writing that poem, I will be able to identify what's been on my mind for that period of time. And she will be able to pick it out and then we'll talk about it. And yeah.
I love that. It's such a beautiful way to kind of maintain friendships. One question I wanted to ask you is about the ethics of story. I guess this book that we've already mentioned, the book within a book, is very central to the story, and I guess it represents kind of everything that they yearn for and the power shift between them. Arva says, just as she's about to read it, I no longer feel that I am the thief. I realise now why she was so reluctant to talk about it over dinner. It doesn't belong to her any more than it belongs to me. What did you want to explore about the kind of like ethics of fictionalizing other people and where the boundaries are and like who gets to own a shared story?
Yeah, I think the reason I wanted to write about it is because I don't know the answer. I'm always interested in writing about a sort of question or a problem that I don't have the answer to and exploring what two different perspectives on it would be. And I think Alia feels 100% like it's what she's written and that we are able to read that third person perspective of how they met at university belongs to her because it happened to her. And Ava feels completely that it doesn't. And I sort of wanted both of those viewpoints to feel valid
Mm.
because to me it is true that almost all artists draw on their lives, if not directly from their lives, then on something that feels like an emotional truth to them. And I think this happens a lot when you're writing novels is people will often ascribe you to a certain character or a certain narrative beat. And the truth is it's kind of all you. And
Yeah,
when you write a novel, it's like different versions of your psyche playing around with each other on the page. But it is also true that reading that as someone who had that experience or shared that experience is incredibly disconcerting and that it feels like you have no right of reply and that what you have said or what you felt has been both misconstrued and misrepresented. And I am really interested in this and I'm really interested in the sort of where the line is because there have been so many things that have happened between writers that have done this. I think there's obviously the famous example of F. Scott Fitzgerald using
Zelda.
Zelda, and I feel like there was a thing about him using parts of her diaries as inspiration for his novel. So where is the line? It's very difficult to say. And when does it become okay? And when does it become problematic? I think not knowing the answer is what made me want to write about it and to open up those perspectives.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. Have you ever experienced it? Have you found yourself in a friend's novel?
I've definitely read things where I've seen something, however slim that is, like a glimmer of something that will feel like something I said, or a presentation that feels like it's based on my presentation, or something like that. And it is disconcerting, but where does it, and how much is anyone thinking? Also, you know, when you write novels, they're so long that it's very difficult to hold the whole of it in your head.
Yeah,
And it's quite difficult to know what you were thinking at any given point.
I was going to ask you actually because I mean, I love the book. I thought you were so good at evoking the kind of nostalgia of the past and university and stuff. But it's also like really keenly observed. And I just wanted to ask you about your writing process. As you're writing these different scenes, are you a prolific note taker? Do you write notes and things that you kind of are observing in your day to day life then happen to make their way onto the page then? Or do you squirrel things away? Or are you just literally kind of imagining it as you write? How do you achieve those amazingly observed bits?
I'm not a note taker and I'm not a planner. I think the way I sort of plan is that I try and have an ending in mind and then I write towards that ending. So I won't plan out a book or I won't plan out a chapter or a scene, but I'll know where I need it to end up and I'll write into that.
Mm.
With this book, I think one of the things that I did that I haven't done before and I found quite a useful way of editing was because it was two perspectives. I wanted to feel like you could read all of Arva's chapters from start to finish without Alia's in between them, and for it to still feel rich and interesting in like you were getting a character journey. And I wanted the same for Alia's. So I think maybe that's the thing that was the most useful, was that one of the edits I did, I just read Arva's chapters again and edited them and was able to immerse myself in just her voice for a little while and build out that world and build out the details in it. And then with Alia's chapters, I did the same. I think it's just about tapping into what you want to communicate as well. So Arva's chapters take place over a very short period of time, I think it's 3 days. And it's over a heat wave in London. And I really wanted to tap into what that feels like, because it's such a particular feeling. And then similarly with Alia's, because as we were saying, it's set in the 2010s. What was it that was important about the 2010s and that felt like it was leaping out? So it's almost like the detail comes from chasing the feeling.
Yes. Writing to an emotion, that's really interesting. So we're coming towards the end. Sadly, I could talk to you for ages, but I wanted to ask you, what does finding your voice mean to you?
I think in a writing sense, it's about finding your way into a story that feels authentic and that feels like a register that you could comfortably write a whole book in. And that's the thing I think that is almost like quite a big challenge, particularly with novel writing, because you have to spend so long with the voices and with the characters. And with this book, as I was saying, it took a lot of trial and error. And at one point it was a role-playing game. At one point it was a period novel. It just took so many things to be able to find the voice of it. And I think sometimes that will take quite a long time and it will be instinctive in a way. Like when you feel that click and you're like, it's almost like viewing flats or homes or something in a way. Could I live here? Is this a voice I can live with for the years it's going to take me to write this? But also making sure you find a voice that you care about. I was saying to you before that one of the things I found funny is that now that some people have read the novel, they will tell me their opinions of it. And I've had people who have not liked some of my characters, but for me, there's...
How dare they? Who didn't they like?
Some people didn't like Arva. Some people didn't like Hamid, who is Alia's husband, who gets one chapter in the book, in his perspective. Yeah. But for me to write any voice, I have to feel like complete empathy with them. And it doesn't mean they won't do things that you disagree with. And it doesn't mean they won't have opinions that you disagree with. You don't have to agree with your characters to feel them. And feeling them is more important than agreeing with them.
Yeah, so that you feel that you understand where they're coming from. So I think we're coming to the end, but just one last thing. Are you working on anything now? Have you got an idea for your next novel?
Yeah, I'm sort of in the doodling stage of it, which is quite nice. And it is another relationship story, because I think everything I write probably will be, but it's very different from Strange Girls, and it is historical and a little bit of a departure, I think, in terms of setting and genre, but also about connection and what we were talking about before, about how meeting someone can change your life and your perspective on things, and also about what it can feel like to be dissatisfied and alienated with the world. So sort of the same themes, but just in a completely different setting.
Well, I look forward to reading it. I'm going to go back and read your other works as well, because I so love this.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, look forward to your next book as well. Sarvat Hasin, thank you so much for speaking to me. It's been a pleasure. I really loved talking to Sarvat. One thing that really struck me was what she said about friendship breakups. When a romantic relationship ends, we have a script for it. People know what to say or how to support you. But when a friendship breaks down, especially one as ambiguous as in the novel, the grief can feel just as profound, and yet there is very little language around it. I also really like what she said about how friendships can shift over time. When you're young, you and your closest friends can live almost identical lives. Your days are structured in the same way, your ambitions overlap, your worlds feel shared. But once adulthood begins, every decision starts to pull you into slightly different directions, whether it's careers, relationships, children, or geography. And slowly, those shared worlds can become harder to sustain. Maybe we should all try out Sarvat's poetic postcards practice. I found what Sarvat said about the distance between talent, ambition, and work really interesting. When you're young, two people might both dream of becoming writers and both believe they'll do it. But who gets there is more complicated than talent alone. It's about time and the circumstances of your life, and whether you're able, for whatever reason, to carve out the space that creative work demands. In many ways, that idea sits right at the heart of Strange Girls, a novel about friendship, creative ambition, and the different paths our lives take. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the conversation, do follow the podcast so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you'd like to stay connected to these conversations and hear about upcoming events and gatherings, you'll find a link to the How You Find Your Voice mailing list in the show notes. Until next time.